So welcome all. We have a webinar on innovations in marine seismic sources from the traditional to transformation. So webinar is given by Suzanne Range and Thomas Elboth from Sharewater. So quick first introduction, and the webinar is part of the webinar series organized by ACG's Europe Regional Advisory Committee. And yeah, Suzanne she's earned her PhD in geophysics from University in Berlin in 2007, and has since held various technical roles in the geophysical industry. Then she commenced her professional journey as a research scientist, specializing in multi-sensor processing at Schlumberger in London. In 2015, she transitioned into a leadership role as a lead marine geophysicist for multi-sensor technology in Oslo. In 2018, Suzanne joined Sharewater Geoservices as principal geophysicist, where her responsibilities included shaping Sharewater's strategic direction in multi-sensor streamer and air gun source technology. As of February 2023, she served as Sharewater's technical sales and commercialization manager. Thomas holds a PhD in mathematics from University in Oslo, Norway, and for the last 2 decades he has been working as in the industry on a variety of technical and managerial roles. In 2005, he embarked on his career as an R&D geophysicist in Fugro Seismic, where he specialized in development of both software and hardware for seismic acquisition and processing. He continued in 2013 as he joined CGGs as R&D project manager, overseeing diverse projects related to marine seismic acquisition and processing. And 2018, he assumed his role of senior research advisor within the same organization. And since 2021, Thomas joined Sharewater Geoservices as a lead geophysicist, primarily focusing on cutting-edge developments related to new marine vibrator technology. Thomas also mentors master students and PhD students, while serving as PhD committee member at the University of Oslo. Both Suzanne and Thomas have been part of several inventions, patents, and been authors and co-authors on various papers, and been very active in the geoscience community. So thanks for joining this webinar, and the webinar is on seismic sources. So the authors or the presenters will take us through the historical overview of the marine sources, and then take through evolution of seismic source technology, highlighting the conventional and yet indispensable classical air gun arrays, and then bring us to the realm of innovations, introducing novel air guns and their potential. But of course, they will take a step into the new applications of the marine seismic vibrator as its disruptive technology. So with this, Suzanne and Thomas, please go ahead and with the webinar.
Yeah, Thomas is starting first, so I'm handing over the mouse to point at stuff.
So we can start very easy up. Seismic sources, any device which releases energy into the earth in the form of seismic waves. Well, almost, at least. That's what we're going to talk about today. I start off with the 2 first slides here, and then hand it over to Susie again. But we have sort of the brief history of marine seismic sources. So, from my understanding of this, and I'm sure someone knows more, but it started after the Second World War, and they're using dynamite, and that must have been cool, but it was also some QHSE hazard related to that. Now, in the sort of mid-1960s, there were at least 3 different source technologies that were competing. So they were using gas guns. This is lower left here, where basically you have propane and oxygen or something explosive, flammable, and you ignite it and you get a boom. In the 60s, they were also starting with marine vibrators that were used. And then, of course, with Steven Szyminski from, well, I think the first patent was in 1962, but from the mid-60s, the sort of air gun came along. No, the 2 first ones, they're dangerous and they're out, thankfully. So this was the situation then, sort of in 1970. But it turned out that air guns, they were just working. They were great, and they've been sort of dominating the seismic market for 50+ years now. There have been some occasional use of marine vibrators, which I'll talk about towards the end of this presentation, but that's kind of the introduction to seismic sources. And then Susie starts with the air guns.
Yes. Yes, so Thomas and I collected actually a multitude of material to talk you through. And we thought we're going to start with air guns, like the principles of air gun in general. Then we will talk through some classical arrays and how they evolved and what's special about some of them before we move on to low frequency rich sources. Followed by low impact sources and high resolution sources on the air gun side. So let's dive into the air guns itself. So you see a typical air gun here. I hope you can see my mouse. Maybe I should get the laser pointer up here. So it consists usually of a main housing, a firing chamber, a volume chamber, and a solenoid block that controls how it actually goes off. And they all look very similar. And in order to see how it's actually working, we should have a look at a sliced up version of it, which you see here. So this is the firing chamber that you had here. This is the main housing that you had here, and then the volume chamber you had here. And let's see if we can fire it. So the air was in here, and now basically the solenoid triggers it, and the shuttle moves, and the air is released typically in a clover shape pattern. And then when you look at this, how it's recorded as a signature of an air gun, you will find three main components. You will find the so-called direct arrival, the sound that is produced when the air gun's ports first open. You will also find its reflection from the sea surface, the so-called source ghost, that has the opposite polarity typically to the direct arrival. And then you will see a multitude of bubble pulses that are produced by the expansion and the collapse of the air bubble that goes on for several times. If you want to read more about that, I highly recommend Bill Dragoset's paper in the Leading Edge from the 2000s. With that, I think we can dive into the classical sources now that we understood how a single air gun works. So typically air guns, classical arrays consist of 2 to 3 gun strings that are called sub-arrays. Those gun strings are usually in the order of 15 meters long. So here 15 meters. And they have 6 to 7 equidistant positions in each string. The air guns are typically towed a certain depth below the sea surface that is controlled by those depth ropes that you see here. And then you have a float that keeps obviously everything afloat, and then positioning units that are 2 or more typically per gun string. And then the combination of air guns or clusters underneath here, they are not randomly chosen, they are chosen for tuning. And in order to understand this a little bit better, I have a little cartoon as well. So what you see here is one single gun string that consists of different volumes. So we have 2 larger clusters of different volumes at the front and then individual guns towards the back. And then I show you the near field hydrophone recording here of those 6 positions measured a meter away from it. And what you basically see is that for all of those 6 positions, the peaks where the air is originally released, we saw that earlier. I'm showing it now without the source ghost for now. They align perfectly well, but the bubble oscillation is different, and they are chosen such that the bubble frequencies oscillate differently and have maximum destructive interference. For that to work, the gun distances within your gun string need to be chosen such that they don't interact with each other, but can still freely oscillate the individual bubbles. That will become important later for one of the gun types that I will talk about. And then, well, if you did it like this, ideally, then if you sum everything up, you will see that the peak sums up and aligns nicely. You get the source ghost, of course, on top of it, but the bubble had maximum destructive interference, and you have basically very low amount of bubble pulses here, which gives you a nice peak to bubble ratio, which is highly desired. And that in turn results in a nice flattish spectrum without a lot of spectral ripples. And corner frequency of your spectrum is typically here, controlled by the largest gun or cluster that you have in your array. So that's basically classical air guns in a nutshell, but it's not all of it. So there's a couple of things that are important to consider relating to the strength of air guns or arrays of air guns. So it's not all just in the volume, whether you cluster or whether you have many elements in your array will play a role. So this is a little cartoon here where I have, in each of the three cases, I have 600 cubic inch. In the first picture, I release it as one large gun. In the second one, I release it as a clustered gun. And in the third one, I have 6 individual guns. And here are the approximate equations that describe the strength of the signal that results from it, with the prediction now being that the array of 6 is obviously the strongest one. If we model that out, what you will see is that this is indeed true. You have, again, here the color coding of the single gun in blue, the cluster in red, and the 6 100 cubic inch guns in purple. And you see by far the highest peak to peak or zero to peak comes from the one that has the most elements. While basically spectrally, they are in the seismic bandwidth, there is obviously ripply. This is not this was not a tuned experiment. But the important part is basically in the corner frequency, there isn't a lot apart from the fact that when you use 6 100 cubic inch guns, that the corner frequency shifts towards the higher frequencies. As I earlier mentioned, the corner frequency is controlled by the biggest single element volume or cluster volume that you have. And the cluster behaves very similar to the single gun of 600 because the bubbles will coalesce. While for the 6 individual elements, that is not the case. One of the very important observations from this picture is that the high frequencies also increase dramatically when you use more elements. And that will become very important later on when we talk about low impact sources that are for the more environmentally conscious surveys. But we will get to that a little bit later. So if you basically designed your array and you tuned it in a certain way, and there's multiple ways of tuning that, then what you basically will end up with, and this is a typical very large standard array of about 5,000 cubic inch, what you will end up is basically a nice low fundamental frequency from the biggest elements you use, a very small spectral ripple, so a flattish response in the seismic bandwidth, and the number of elements that dictate the strength. But what you also see is, depending on which depth you put your arrays, you will get a source notch. And this is the notch here that is just over 90 Hertz and then repeats itself over and over again. In order to combat that, I think it was around 2010-ish, maybe a little bit earlier, multi-level sources came about, and they were quite a hype at the time, I recall. And they were trying to get rid of that deep source ghost notch. So basically, what happens when you have two air guns deployed at the same level or depth, and they shoot at the same time, the respective reflected wave field at the free surface, the ghost basically, they are synchronized, and with that they are producing a similar magnitude ghost to the primary. Only the amplitude flips, as I mentioned earlier already, because the reflection coefficient on the sea surface is negative. However, if you were to deploy two air guns at different depths, and the deeper gun shoots with the exact time delay it takes from the shallower to go to the deeper level, then both downgoing wave fields will now be synchronized, like illustrated in this cartoon. The source ghost itself is not synchronized. They are desynchronized. So they don't add up. They act then now as two smaller ghosts. The optimum depth for the air guns to achieve this is where the notches caused by one gun correspond to the maximum of the energy for the next. As an added benefit for this one is that you actually get some extra low frequencies from the deeper air gun, or from the array that is at the deeper level. So the multi-level source allows defocusing of the ghosts, but the ghosts, as you see, they still kind of exist. But nevertheless, the absence of the deep notches in the spectra allows for a successful designature of the seismic in the full bandwidth. The process does require some accurate estimation of the source signature, and talking to some of the people processing, that's not always a straightforward thing to do with multi-layer sources. However, since this technology was coming out, software has evolved on how to more and more accurately predict source signatures, and also the way we measure source signatures with single or dual near-field hydrophones has evolved along the way as well, in order to get rid of some of the model assumptions. But if you basically desynchronize the ghost, what will happen that you end up not having that one deep source notch, but you have a fairly flat spectrum, added low frequencies here, and then that deep notch is filled, but you get two smaller notches that aren't really deep notches. If you would like to read a little bit more about the principles itself, I can recommend these two papers here from Cambois et al. In 2009 at the SEG annual meeting, and then in 2013, Seliqui, is that the right pronunciation? Yes, it was a colleague of Thomas's, wasn't it? He published also an abstract from the SEG annual meeting. So that's the principle about multi-level sources, but there is multiple ways to basically adapt for that. So one adaptation is basically you have your let's assume you have 3 strings in your overall source, 3 gun strings, that you put 2 of them shallow and 1 deep. So that is one adaptation, and they is comparatively straightforward. And then you see here the added benefit of having extra lows, and then you fill in the deep source ghost notch here. And then when you look at the inline crossline directivity of the single level source versus the multi-level source, you can also see that those deep notches are basically eliminated in the multi-level source. Another way of doing it, rather than having multiple gun strings at different levels, is by actually using 2 different depths within the same gun string. So basically you can have the first part of your gun string at a certain depth, and then you can have the second part of your gun string at another depth. In the example that was given in the paper, it was 6 and 9 meters. However, it wasn't quite clear whether the 6 meters came first or the 9 meters came first in the gun string. So the actual implementation, I'm not 100% about, but it was definitely multiple levels within the same gun string, and that achieves a similar notch prevention as the implementation of using the different cross lines. So basically just lifting one of the gun strings of the 3 up. You get very similar to the earlier picture, but now as a azimuthal view, you get basically the notches nicely filled for the 2 layer sources, which are here on the right-hand side compared to the notch that you see here in the 1 layer source on the left-hand side of those pictures. Yet another adaptation is has been published as the geosource, and there is, if you Google it or go to YouTube, you find a very informative video to go with that, or you read Geosource Deblending by Tian et al. In 2015. And they have a very different solution compared to the previous 2. So they still have strings at different depth levels, but the subsources are fired at random time delays. And that means that the primary, in contrast to the previous 2 implementations, is not aligned. Remember, the key was the primary is aligned and the ghost is defocused. Here, that is not done. It's random time delays. And then, according to Tian et al., you require 3 processing steps to make this work. The first one being the subsource separation, so you have to deblend the data. Then you need the far field signature estimation for the individual subsources, and then you desig and deghost the data based on that. So the paper from 2015 actually shows that quite successfully. This is spectra from the stack levels, where the sources were at 10 and 14 meters respectively, or the different strings. And you see the individual, notches here. And then on stack level, you basically see that once you deghost and desig the dual level source, it's a fairly flattish spectrum throughout. So it achieved very, very similar features. But it's not just the source ghost that can be bothersome in classical airgun arrays. Another one is that the source arrays that I've shown you so far are all azimuthally variant. They have a directionality. And in narrow azimuth towed streamer surveys, that may not be as critical. But when you go to ocean bottom seismic, 3D and 4-component seabed acquisitions, which are growing in popularity, then it becomes important, because seabed acquisitions are true 3D, and each receiver will see the source array from many different azimuths around it. And that azimuthal directivity may be detrimental to the seabed data, because it may compromise the common receiver domain, which is the domain in which essentially all seabed data processing is carried out. And it introduces directivity into the data that may be used, for example, for the analysis of anisotropy. And when you want to, know about anisotropy, directional property in your output source is probably not a compromise you want to have in your data. So what are the requirements of an azimuthally invariant source? Well, apart from it having to be, of course, azimuthally invariant, what we would like to have is that it has a comparable acoustical output compared to the conventional arrays that we had considered until now. We want a very similar, if not better, repeatability. It needs to be just as towable. And we also want no additional operational constraints with regards to, how you deploy or recover the sources. And you want a similar amount of air consumption overall. So basically you want all the good things from the conventional arrays, and on top of that, you want it to be azimutally invariant. And the first paper I found about it that explained it in a very simple, nice sketch, which was very intuitive, was a 2001 abstract from Hoppestad et al. That introduced the concept of hexagonal compositions for, getting the perfect symmetry. So they proposed basically to arrange it in hexagonal composites and then creating perfect symmetry by using the same type in a circular manner around it. Obviously, we don't typically create sources that have 5 gun strings, so that's probably taking it a little bit far. But the example that was given was the center example, where you have one triple cluster in the center, and then it gave six just normal clusters of exactly the same gun type just around it. And that gives you actually a very nice, symmetrical, azimutally invariant source overall. However, that concept had not been implemented in practice as far as I know, for several reasons. You typically don't offset the first elements in your gun string, and you also do not really want to use 5 gun strings for one source. So in practice, what I've seen, and I'm just choosing now one of the commercial azimutally invariant sources I've come across in my life, it looks more like this. So you use 3 gun strings, and then you have the heavy hitters, the large elements in the center, and then you have some form of symmetry about medium and smaller clusters around it. So the symmetry here, you have the 125s around there, and then that is balanced out by the 235 cubic inch clusters here. And then you have 2 small clusters in the center in order to give you a little bit of extra height, which contributes to the peak to peak. So that is not quite as azimutally invariant as the previous source, but you see that for 30, 60, and 90 hertz, it looks pretty decent. And even for 120 hertz, you still get, angles up to 50 degrees heading that are fairly nicely invariant. So that is looking pretty decent for an azimutally invariant source. I'm not saying this is the only type. I'm just saying that this is one of the implementations I have come across. There is multiple variants of that type of source, but as long as you obey some of the geometry and symmetry structures, you will actually get a fairly nice azimutally invariant source that is of particular benefit in the OBN scenarios. Another thing that is very beneficial in the OBN scenario is low frequency rich sources, because in the ocean bottom scenario, you can actually, listen to the very low frequencies because you are not impacted by tone noise that is predominantly in the streamer world in the very low frequencies. You can get really nice large offsets in OBN that streamers are limited by their maximum length. And for that, you actually want to have nice low frequencies. And there are several implementations of the low frequency rich sources. The first one being a hypercluster, Gemini, the Harmony, the TPS, and then I have an extra goodie that doesn't really have a name at the end of it as well. So let's start with the hypercluster. The hypercluster was introduced by Hoppestad et al. In 2012 and is based on a phenomenon called frequency locking that was discovered by Laws et al. In the 90s. And the principle is basically that air gun bubbles can interact through the pressure wave field. You don't need to have all the bubbles coalesce to behave as one bigger unit. And at distances of mild interactions between the individual elements, here the individual air guns, the oscillation frequency will start to shift from those of the smaller volumes to those of a combined volume of the individual or of the units. And at distances of very strong interaction, they exhibit pretty much cluster type oscillation frequencies, even though they don't coalesce. So they are not at coalescing distances. And under full frequency locking, so when you got it just close enough, what you basically achieve is that your dominant frequency, the fundamental frequency that I was earlier talking about, when we looked at the corner of those spectral amplitude spectra, that the dominant frequency is now associated actually with the total volume of the combined or the total combined volume of all your guns together. And it gets you a higher peak than just using one single large volume, because as you remember, the strength of an array increases with the number of units you used. So you get the best of both worlds. You get a higher peak and you get a dominant frequency shift in this hypercluster version. And that led to a commercial BSP source that you can see here in this picture. But this structure was not particularly towable or easily towable at fast source boat speeds that we would like for an efficient acquisition. Nevertheless, you know, the hyperclustering itself is a pretty attractive concept. What you see here is the spectral response from that Hoppestad paper, and you can see that you have in black just the background noise that was measured at a certain distance away from the guns. Then you see the response of the full fixed gun cluster, which is here in blue. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Go back. Then the response of just triggering it as 3 clusters. So basically, this is a cluster of 3, and this is a cluster of 3, triggering it without it being close enough to be in the bubble locking. And then you can also trigger them as 6 individual guns. That is the one in red here. And yeah, you can basically appreciate that in the very low frequencies, so below the 5.5 hertz, you get up to 10 hertz uplift compared to the individual guns. But you still have a pretty decent, you know, signal to noise over the background noise level in this particular example. Another implementation that or the next to the market on those extended low frequency sources was the Gemini. Originally developed by ION, it came in 2 sizes, the 4,000 cubic inch and the 8,000 cubic inch. You see here a drawing that I was kindly supplied for by TGS, where you basically see that one big massive chamber, and then you have 2 output ports that basically release the air from that super huge chamber. It's typically operated between 1500 and 2000 PSI, and it works with all the standard gun controllers that you can get on the market. It is fully containerized, including the floats, and 1 or more units can be put per string. The firing heads here are actually 2 bolt 1500 LLs. And I've been told the source can refill or has a refill time between 6 to 20 seconds, and that is vessel dependent. I appreciate that it's a large range, so it's probably also the number of compressors on the vessel that will dictate that. spectrally, it looks like this. So what you see here is I think I only got supplied the 8,000 cubic inch version. Yes. So what you basically see here is its spectra. The fundamental frequency is about 3.4 hertz here, and it peaks at about 205 decibel. It emits a sufficiently large frequency bandwidth for seismic imaging as a standalone source, and the amplitudes above 200 hertz are suppressed compared to standard arrays, and that's obviously not a surprise, because 2 firing heads versus a standard array's 24 or 26 will definitely make a huge difference. It is naturally subject to a spectral ripple due to the lack of tuning, because here you don't now use lots of different gun volumes in order to tune out this ripple here. But bear with me, I show you later an image where I can prove that this is not necessarily a problem. The next one that came out was the Harmony, which is another implementation of a low frequency source, which utilizes hyperclustering technology within a gun string. It's also using standard bolt guns with large chambers within the gun rating, of course. And it's using clustering to increase the strength and to lower the filling time rather than having just 2 large volumes. And you see here the frequency locking in action. So you have all 3 elements having individual bubbles, and they, despite not coalescing, act like the total volume. Spectrally, it looks very similar to what we've just seen. This one peaks around 4.1 hertz at 215 decibel. It's also operated at 2000 psi. The maximum, or its volume, is 6,000 cubic inch. It uses 3 clusters that are bubble locked in one string. And again, it works with standard controllers because it uses standard guns. It's also containerized, and it flip-flops at 25 meters. And I already told you it's at 4.1 hertz. The next one, because you can, of course, always go bigger, is the tuned pulse source. And that one is up to 26,000 cubic inch, although I found one paper where they mentioned 28,000 cubic inch. So it might have gone up a little bit since I made that slide. This one is operated at 1,000 psi, so that's half the pressure of the 2 previous ones. And again, it works with standard gun controllers. It's about 7.5 meters long, but this is the chamber, not the bubble. The bubble itself has a radius of about 2 meters. So Thomas is nearly 2 meters. You could fit into that bubble and it would completely hide you. And this can flip-flop at 50 meters. It has a 0 to peak of less than 10 bar and a fundamental frequency of 2.8 hertz. Spectrally, you see it here. So that is the TPS source as a far field reconstruction, as well as I guess an experimental version of it, or a modeled version of it. And the 2 agree quite well. And you have that peak at 2.8 hertz. You have here, in comparison, in red, a conventional array, and then the background noise here you see in yellow. And of course, naturally, this tuned pulse source, because it's not actually a tuned array, it's a tuned pulse source, also has that deep notch. And people are wondering, you know, can you overcome that notch? And if you look at the background, you know, level here of noise level, you see that you have a little bit of margin, but not a lot. So it was interesting to see a paper come out just this year in June at the EAGE by Shang et al., where we see the imaging of this low frequency source, the TPS source, where they compare the images of a conventional array in the shallow as well as in the deep to the TPS source in the shallow as well as in the deep. And I guess you would agree with me that this looks extremely comparable. So they managed to take this tuned pulse source and create some pretty decent images from those data that are very comparable to a conventional 5,100 cubic inch array. And we know they used the extra uplift from those low frequencies for velocity model building. And here you can also see the difference between the two in the bottom 0.5 hertz to 2 hertz bandwidth. And you can clearly see that you have a better signal to noise ratio in the very lows here for the tuned pulse source. So maybe it's not as of course it's reasonable to be skeptical of notches and spectral ripples in your source design, but I think that some of the examples that are published surrounding this, and that is not just published by the tuned pulse source, we know that the Gemini as well as the Harmony had successes as well, but with the TPS being the most extreme one, I think we can conclude that if the most extreme one gets those incredibly good comparable results, that the other two do as well. To summarize the common benefits or other benefits of those 3 low frequency sources that I've just mentioned is that there's a few gems in here. One being they are all incredibly compact compared to standard arrays, because they don't, occupy a lot of space. They're small. They're large in volume, but they're small in space. So with that, you actually get by nature a very nice azimuthal invariance. And I have here the proof provided by one of the publications from TGS, where they compare a standard OBN array, although I'm sure I would have probably designed that source a little bit more azimuthally invariant. But you can see that, using the Gemini or that those compact type of sources gives you a pretty decent wavelet across all the different azimuths. All of those sources occupy 1 gun string, and that allows you to have more of them. So you can think triple, quad, or more sources if you want. And despite all their large volumes, because they don't have a lot of elements in them, they are actually all gentle giants. If you compare a PAM recording that is usually used, for monitoring whales, and I only had a Harmony example, but I'm sure all the others look very, very similar. And we had the PAM recording about 100 meters away from the 2 sources, and you compare a conventional source of 4,000 cubic inch to the 6,000 cubic inch gentle giant, and it goes from 0 hertz to 200,000 hertz here. You can basically see that is indeed in the high frequencies a gentle giant. I know some of the people that are more experienced in sources will wonder, "Ooh, what is this here?" And I can tell you, we wondered that too. So that extended, high frequency 20,000 to 40,000 hertz signal here that happens after the source actually released its energy is a little whistling sound that the PAM picked up from refilling the arrays, whereas the conventional array filling the different gun volumes at different speeds. So it's a little bit broader. And the harmony having had 6 chambers of equal size, basically being then more defined as individual ones. But you basically can see in the pump signal also in the high frequencies, the refilling of those guns, just for those who wonder. And as I said, there is one other low frequency source that doesn't quite fit into that concept. And that was introduced by Martin Landro and one of his students, I think it was Daniel Wehner. And it's published in 2019 in Geophysics. And they obtain low frequencies from shallow air guns. So the sources are fired very close to the sea surface. And then the bubble basically bursts into the surrounding air. And that can give you an uplift below 5 Hertz. And it does it, not just this, it also mitigates the bubble oscillation and gives you in return a fairly flat spectrum. You can see one of the experiments here of a 1,200 cubic inch air gun triggered in a fjord at different depths, ranging from 3.3 meters all the way to 1.3 meters, at which the bubble basically breached the sea surface. The 1.8 meter here is in speech marks because they were not 100% sure if it was exactly at 1.8 meters, so there was some uncertainty. And then the corresponding spectra you see below with a zoom in the very low frequencies. But you see that the mitigation of the bubble oscillation for the one where the bubble breaches, you have basically, there's no bubble in here anymore, which is actually a really nice feature. And that in turn, you know, spectrally, you can also see it's really nice and flat. And then in the very low frequencies here, you see how you get 10-15 dB uplift in the ultra lows because you towed it so shallow. So when speaking to gun mechanics, they are not keen on that, but there's always resistance to something new. So I guess if that was to be considered in a towable, you know, marine seismic acquisition, we would have to rethink a little bit the design of airgun arrays to make this viable. But in general, if it gives you an uplift and a very nice spectrum and it eliminates the bubble oscillation, if you don't want that, then that is probably something one may want to try.
So it's a nice little engineering project.
Yes, it's definitely a nice engineering project. That's right. So, and with that, I would like to move into the low impact sources. And there are several ones about. There are some that have a controlled acceleration. Some of them are falling under the compact sources. Some have particular shooting patterns and some use passive sources. So when we talk about low impact, what we mean is obviously the sensitivity to sound of all marine fauna. And the most credible research done in those topics come from Southall et al. In 2007 and from NOAA in 2013. And they all surround matrices of peak pressure and sound exposure levels. And why is that important to us? Is because we emit frequencies outside the seismic bandwidth. And those marine mammals that are listed here have frequency responses that fall sometimes within the seismic bandwidth, like the large whales. And then we have some that are just outside the seismic bandwidth or at the upper end of the seismic bandwidth that are obviously sensitive to what we emit as well. So if you paid attention to the earlier spectra, we emit quite a little bit of energy outside the seismic bandwidth. But where does this high frequency come from? So one can illustrate this in a fairly easy sketch. So what you see here is the entire pulse of an air gun. It's a 290 cubic inch air gun from 3 to 25,000 hertz. On the top plot, we see the peak pressure, and at the bottom plot, we see the cumulative energy over the entire bandwidth of that air gun pulse. Note the peak pressure is 4.8 bar in this particular example. Now, we add a high cut filter, say 80 hertz, and plotting the same thing again. Only 3 to 80 hertz bandwidth now. The low frequencies are most useful for the seismic in itself. In the top plot, we can see that the peak pressure is reduced from 4.8 to 2.8 bar, and that indicates we do not really need the high peaks for the lower frequency energy. And secondly, the bottom plot shows that the low frequency energy is emitted throughout the pulse of the airgun signal, meaning the low frequency energy comes from the bubbles. Now we can add also a low cut filter to that experimental signature. Now plotting it from 80 to 25,000 hertz. So that's the bandwidth that is basically high and possibly outside of your useful energy anyway. And if we look at the bottom plot now, it is quite clear that all the high frequency energy is coming from the output of the initial steep rise of the pulse. And this shows that if we want to control the high frequency energy of an air gun, we need to control the initial start of this pulse. And that was first attempted in a collaboration between Western GECO and Bolt Teledyne for the E-source, where they tried to basically control the speed of the shuttle and how it opens, and also included a novel port shape of the air gun itself in order to reduce the high frequencies and the high acceleration at the start of an air gun trigger. You can pretty much see here the two comparing, with the green one being the one that has now the shuttle speed controlled. Just because those were cut open versions, this is again how the guns look, and this is what I mean by the novel port shape that starts to release the air a little bit slower than the original, just coming straight out. Spectrally, this looks like this. I'm using here the Gandalf models of a full array, a standard array, with using the standard guns with the standard ports and no control of the shuttle speed in blue. And then we have that E-source coming in 3 different versions, so you can choose whether you want to, or at which frequency, starting frequency, you want basically the attenuation of the high frequencies to happen, with the number A or type A being the most conservative and least attenuating one, and C being the most aggressively attenuating one, already giving you a 3 dB from about 60 hertz onwards. So there's a big question, is this adapted industry-wide? Is there some resistance in using this type of sources? And the answer is actually no. So it's being used around the world in multiple 3D explorations as well as 4Ds, and in areas of environmentally sensitive zones where certain species had to be protected. And well over 2.4 million production shots have been fired, and adding up all the different vendors, about 120 E-sources are in use worldwide. But it's not just the E-source that does that. Sercel has a version as well. It's called the Blue Pulse. It's also a low band limited source. It's based on their G-source and G-source 2 designs. And you can upgrade those G sources by swapping essentially 3 parts out. And Blue Pulse comes in 2 flavors. So the former one came in 3. So here you can choose between a dampening at around 100 Hertz and a dampening around 200 Hertz. But other than that, it's basically a very similar concept of suppressing the high frequencies. You can also get low impact sources by going to compact small sources. Like some of it was proposed by Hager et al. In 2017, and then in 2018 there was an EAGE Marine Acquisition Workshop that, if you have the chance, go back and read those abstracts, because there was lots of talk about all of that. And the key is basically you increase efficiency by using much smaller sources. Like here's an example of a hexa source, where you basically, instead of having just 2 sources that consist of 3 gun strings, each gun string basically turns into its own source. And then within the gun string, you don't even use the whole gun string. You keep it very compact, like in this particular example here, just 2 clusters. And that has, again, the same effect, because now you're using 4 output ports. And 4 output ports compared to the 26 output ports of a standard array will also be a low impact source. It also gives you a reduced shock point interval, and with that better source carpet coverage. You have quite some degrees of freedom in the shooting patterns. They're smaller, more focused source points. Again, that makes them more azimutally invariant. You get a better image, and as I said, they are better for the environment because it's less impact. And then Thomas pointed me to this incredibly good experiment here, where an image is provided of over the line. A standard gun array was successively reduced in volume from the largest volume down to the smallest 1 or 2 clusters, right?
1 cluster.
One cluster only. And this is the image resulting to it. So the question is, where's the large volume source and where's the small volume source, basically? Did we reduce the volume from here to here, or the other way around? And most people will find it hard to basically point their finger at it. And the people who watched Per Eivin's presentation in 2018, of course, will know. But it's this way around. But it basically shows that you can effortlessly, go compare the different variations. And one could argue that you never needed that big source to start with when it comes to, how much impact should my source have. Another good publication comes from Tweenam et al. That was this year's EAGE CBED workshop in the context of hexa sources for time-lapse. If your baseline wasn't a hexa source. And we actually, Francesca showed very well how nicely repeatable or comparable everything is, and how much better resolution you ultimately get when you exploit the full potential of those hexa sources with those much better shooting patterns. And from a 4D point of view, you can see that the dual source monitor and the hexa source monitor are incredibly comparable, and there is no reason to be too afraid of swapping sources, provided your 4D response is not on the very weak high risk side. Another way of looking at low impact sources is Seismic, that was published by Stian Hegnar et al. In 2019. PGS made some headwaves with that one when they introduced the continuous wave field. So basically it completely abandons the concept of individual shot records as such, and just continuously emits energy by triggering individual small air guns with dense randomized time intervals. So you see the conventional source here as 2 red peaks, and then all the other individual guns being fired as those little green peaks. So that's it's quite clear that peak to peak is much smaller, and with that, of course, your sound pressure level and your sound exposure level will be greatly reduced when you use it that way. It also gives you an improved source side sampling, an inline and crossline, and the multiple sources can operate simultaneously and continuously. It gives you increased operational efficiency. There's no speed limit imposed by the eSeismic method as such, and no clean record length required. So potential to increase the number of sources is obviously there that can be operated simultaneously. And we just talked about the environmental impact. And here's a comparison from a case study offshore Malaysia, where you have the eSeismic version and the conventional triple source array. And I think when you look closely, you can see all the features are there in both versions. And that's quite incredible, given, you know, that it was just many individual guns being fired. They didn't leave it there. They went even more extreme. Stian was on fire here. He then tried to use ship noise as a source, so passive, no air guns at all. So and that was actually, I think he won an award for this work they're definitely out of the box thinking. You can read all about it in the first break in November 2022. Where they basically used the noise, the propeller noise or the ship noise from the towing vessel of the streamers as a seismic source. And it is here compared basically when you use just that noise for imaging purposes, and here with a conventional airgun source, and it's pretty incredible that you get that much out. But I don't think it is actually easy to get your source locations and the source signature estimated. I'm sure Stian had to fiddle quite a little bit on that one. But in the interest of time, we shouldn't marvel about that and just come back to the general topics. So low impact sources. The key for low impact sources is always your background noise level. If your background noise level in the seismic bandwidth is of a certain magnitude, of course you want to be above that, but you don't need to emit anything in the very high out of seismic bandwidth frequencies. So the spectrum is key for the design. Minimize the highs, keep or maximize the low frequencies, and you don't really need a lot of emissions above 120 to 150 hertz, because they are most likely just undesired noise. They are not even, you know, in your normal 4D processing. Control the highs. You can do that with sources that control the speed of air, or you control it with the amount of elements you have in your array, with Stian going as far as having 0 elements in the passive seismic version. And maintain the lows by keeping the largest volume of your elements in your gun string. So if you had to make a decision, take the larger clusters, keep those, and get rid of the high frequency small guns that you use for tuning. And the other extreme to the lows is the highs. Of course, there is some applications that require high resolution sources, namely sparkers and boomers. They are just now gaining traction And the applications are typically in the high and ultra high resolution world of geophysical surveys, like wind farm site surveys, geohazard surveys, cable and pipeline route surveys, and subsea installations. When you compare them to air guns, it's quite clear they are targeting something very different. So we have here at the bottom, I grabbed it from a brochure of Split K, an image of a certain site that is imaged with just a small air gun. And you see its penetration depth and its frequency content quite clearly. Then a Sparker, which is a higher resolution, higher in frequency, but it has much less penetration and far quicker attenuates as well than the air gun. And then you have the extreme, the sub-bottom profiler, which is part of the boomer family, where you basically you only see the very, very nearest part of your near surface. In this very band limited version. So Sparkers and boomers work very different to air guns, so they don't discharge air. They work by discharging an electrical pulse between electrodes on a grounding point in seawater, and this discharge creates an acoustic pulse. You can operate them in depths between 5 meters and 4.5 kilometers, which is an incredibly wide range, although I doubt it's the same equipment. Then they have a frequency range from about 100 hertz to 2 kilohertz, and the pulse's duration is typically in the order of 1 to 5 milliseconds. And that's it. There's no, oscillation bubbles or anything with it. And the penetration is up to 400 milliseconds below the seabed, depending on your geology and also the water depth a little bit. For boomers, they are slightly different. They store the energy in capacitors, but it discharges it through a flat spiral coil. See that here? Instead of generating a spark. And then a copper plate adjacent to the coil flexes away from the coil as the capacitors are discharged. And this flexing basically creates a little extreme pulse that is then transmitted into the water. It's ultra high in resolution. It can be used in salt and fresh water, so it doesn't need extra adaptations. The Sparkers do. And then the typical frequency output ranges from about 500 hertz to 4 kilohertz. And the penetration is, of course, lower than the Sparker because the frequency range is higher, of up to about 100 milliseconds. And with that, I think we are going to move to marine vibrators. And I'm handing over the controls to Thomas.
Right. Thank you. Yes, just a kind reminder, you should put on your headphones if you have them now, because I'm going to play some marine vibrator sound, hopefully. Yeah, so we are 2/3 into the presentation now, so I probably try to do this in 20-25 minutes. Right, start off with the history of marine vibrators. So it started in mouse here, yeah. 1967 was the sort of first patent I found from ConocoPhillips. And then 68, it looked like this, and 69 it looked like this, and someone came up with this design in 1970. But if you look carefully, you see the patent now belongs to First City National Bank of Houston, which kind of tells us that they went bust. So that was the 70s. 60s, sorry, and then here we have some from the 80s and 90s and some PDS here from the early 2000s. So it's not really a new idea, but last sort of, say 10 years, there's been sort of a resurrection of marine vibrators. So there's several new initiatives, and I've listed some of them here. I might have left someone out, but just bear with me. So CGG and CSL, they had a project a few years ago. IHI Corporation, they're Japanese. They're operating this one. I think they're sort of mostly done in connection with research. There's a reference here below. Shearwater, we are developing this one called BASE. So unfortunately or fortunately, most of the example will be from BASE, but I also try to include other vibrators as we go on. There's another sort of big industry project called the APS, which is sponsored by ExxonMobil, Total, and Shell. They're also sort of competing with BASE. PDS, they've been a bit on and off the last 15, 20 years. Here's a slightly older picture of one of their vibrators. Geokinetic is operating a vibrator, and they're operating this commercially. It's small, but sort of every EAG or SCG, there's a sort of a paper from them. Teledyne, there was some buzz a few years ago. I don't know what the status of this one. And then, of course, we have the Wolfspar, the BP one, which is sort of the ultra low frequency vibrator. I'll maybe touch upon that slightly. Of course, how good are vibrators? And there's been quite a few publications over the years. And here we have the CDG one, where they compare their vibrator with airgun survey. The same from IO Corporation, vibrators against airguns. Same with Aquavib, vibrators against airgun. This one is quite recent. EAGE last year. APS, they did their alpha test last year as well. So here's their comparison. And here's a comparison from Gecko Procla in 1997. So this has been done many times before. And what we can sort of see from this is that vibrators seems to give a reasonable image, although they're not so powerful. So it's usually sort of for shallow seismic or down maybe a couple of seconds, couple of kilometers. We don't normally use this for deep exploration, except maybe the BP Wolfspar. Okay, so that was the history. So how does marine vibrators work? Well, you can think of them basically as a loudspeaker. And the bigger the radiator area, the bigger the longer stroke, and the more the duty cycle, which means the percentage of time they're operating. That's the thing they depend upon. And they can be, well, let's see, you can have a very big stroke and a big radiator like the Wolfspar to create low frequency, or you can have these mid to high frequency vibrators that are sort of smaller radiator. Marine vibrators, they can be electrically driven, hydraulically driven, or driven by air. And a lot of them is actually driven by air half the time. That is, the air pushes outwards, and then some engine or electric engine or hydraulics pushes them inwards. But one thing to think about, sort of reflect over as to vibrator, is that if you're emitting 100 hertz, that means that your vibrators has 6,000 cycles per minute. Or you can think of an engine running at 6,000 RPM. That is kind of mechanically demanding if you want to do this 24/7. So that's maybe the main challenge with vibrators. They're mechanically demanding to make. All right. So typically vibrators, they sweep, they do not fire. And here we have a waveform of a vibrator. This is the displacement, and this is the acceleration. And this is an upsweep. You kind of see it here. Here I plot the power spectrum, and if I click now on, oh, that doesn't work. When how do I get the
get rid of the laser pointer?
Yeah, get rid of the laser pointer. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I hope you hear that. This was an upsweep from a vibrator. Oh, I'll play it again. Of course, vibrators, they can do upsweeps. They can be linear or non-linear. You can do down sweeps. You can do random sweeps, orthogonal sweeps, phase encoder sweeps, all kind of funky sweeps. Or you can play music with a vibrator, and I'll try to play some music here. And this was a file I got from Robert Laws. This was actually, we actually played this. This is from Seneca Lake 2 years ago. So I hope people can hear it. I'll play a little bit more music. I don't have headphones on, but I hear some weak noise from your laptop.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You can hear it. Great, yeah. And here you see the sort of spectrogram of this music. Well, you're not going to play that in reality, but it's just to point out that this is basically a loudspeaker. And how does vibrator data look? Well, this is the sweep data, and then it has to be deconvolved, similar to what you do in land processing, and then you get seismic data, like you see on the right. But the beautiful thing with marine vibrator data is that there's no ground roll or anything problematic here. This is kind of beautiful looking. So that's you have perfect coupling with water, and you don't have perfect coupling with a land vibrator. That's you don't know where you're standing. So the potential here is to get a very, very, very nice picture. Right. Some arguments for a marine vibrator. So there are two reasons to look for vibrators. There are the geophysical reasons, in that they hopefully can improve their quality. They have very good 4D repeatability. I'll talk about that later on. There's some low frequency potential in them. There's potential efficiency gains, and we'll talk through that. But they're also believed to be less intrusive than air guns. They can help us meet regulations, secure a license to operate, and reduce downtime. And by downtime now, I mean downtime related to if you have a marine mammal observer and he tells you that he saw a whale, then you have to stop. But hopefully with vibrators, you don't have to stop. So that in that way, they reduces the downtime. Right. Just continuing this on this sort of the environmental side. So these are air gun. This is air gun pulse. And you see their pressure here, the peak to peak is something like 50 bar. And with a vibrator, the peak to peak is something like 0.5 bar, just to compare them. And of course, the vibrator spreads out the signal in time, while the air gun is a pop. Everything comes here in a few milliseconds. This is maybe 5 or 10 seconds. But so peak pressure is much reduced, and that is believed to be environmentally beneficial. Another reason another environmental reason for using vibrator is that if we look at the out-of-band signal, so on the left here we have air guns, and sort of the in-band signal goes from 3 to 100, 150 hertz, and the out-of-band signal, you see it here, and I can zoom in, there's significant output above 100 hertz. Now with vibrators, if I sweep from 100 to 100 and from 3 to 100 hertz, there's hardly any output above 100 hertz. But actually, if I zoom in, there's a little bit there, and there are some engine noise, and there are some harmonic, and there's some mechanical noise, but I mean, it's much, much reduced compared to air guns, and this is sort of scaled to be on the same level. And referring to earlier slides that Susanne also used, if we sort of stop here at 100, 150 hertz, there's a lot of animals that we don't disturb. That could also be beneficial. The last thing we can do with vibrators is that since we have full control of the emitted signal, which we don't have with air guns, it's very difficult to tune an air gun in terms of frequency output. You can make it larger or smaller, but with vibrator we can exactly select what we want to output. So a way to design a vibrator sweep might be that we first sort of measure the background noise level in an area, and then we design a sweep that gives us a certain number of dB above the background noise level for all frequencies. So that's kind of the red curve here, while the black stapled curve here on top will be the air gun output. So by doing this, we ensure that we get enough signal to noise ratio everywhere, and we don't get too much, which we tend to do with air guns. So just summing up, we can reduce the peak pressure, we can reduce sound exposure outside the sort of seismic band, we can reduce the total energy. And for the industry, this has sort of the potential to unlock sensitive areas and sort of ensure freedom to operate for us to do exploration. Now comes my sort of favorite part. This is the geophysics enabled by marine vibrator. And some of this is hard to follow after having watched us now for 1 hour and 20 minutes. So please try to pay attention. I'm going to talk about these 4 points: source gradients, optimize with the frequency. This comes later because it relates to the ghosts, and improve deblending, and some frequency dependent towards the end. But let's dive into this. So with a vibrator, we can emit a omnidirectional signal, azimuthal invariant, if you like, if it's or more or less in azimuthal environment, or we can produce a directional signal by having two vibrators that are out of phase. And you can think of this gradient source or dipole source as equivalent to a multi-component to having multi-component receivers at the receiver side, so we can have a directive source on the source side. And this gradient information allows for improved cross-line interpolation or reconstruction. So, but in theory, you can go 2 times Nyquist when you have this. There's a long theory. I haven't given the reference here, but yeah, the paper is hopefully mentioned a bit later on. Here's another interesting but a bit complicated slide. So I'm going to compare dithering with phase encoding for deblending. So if you start here on the top, here we have a normal survey, common channel or common offset section, and then we have another common offset section from another source that is dithered. And we combine those two, and here we look at how this looks in the FK domain. So this one, the first source one, is your sort of diamond here. The dither source looks like this, and your blending looks like this. And this is the blending problem you have to solve with air gun dithering, which is challenging. It's being done regularly in the industry now, but it's a challenging deblending problem. Now with vibrators, I have my sort of first vibrator here. This is after deconvolution. And I can phase encode the other vibrator, having this flipping 0-180 degrees. And I can add them together. So this is this one. And then the phase encoding shifts it in the FK domain like this. And my deblending problem looks like this in the FK domain. And I'm going to claim now that it's probably easier to deblend the phase encoded one compared to the dithered one. And saying this, vibrator data is easier to deblend than airgun data. And this, of course, allows for higher deblending, more fold, higher number of sources, and so on. Another good thing with vibrators is that they tend to be highly repeatable. So on the left here, this is from a field test in Seneca Lake. I plotted 15 sweeps on top of each other, and they're sort of exact. They match. You can't see that there are 15 sweeps there. Here on the top here, we computed the energy or the variation in energy for vibrators in green and for airgun pops in red. And this one is taken from APS, one of the other vibrators, where they sort of cross-correlate 200 airgun pops versus 200 sweeps from a vibrator, and you see the standard deviation here goes from 5% to next to nothing. This shows that it's not only the base, even though I'm using data from the base, it's other vibrators as well. They are very repeatable. Switching topic again, vibrators, they have a low frequency potential. Here I've taken published data from the CGG vibrator, the PGS vibrator, from Wolfspar, and from Shearwater, and sort of show how much low frequency stuff it's possible to get here. Now, I just give you a bit of a warning here, is that the CGG vibrator and the PGS vibrator, they have amplitude here on the axis, while the Wolfspar and the Shearwater has energy. So you can't compare the numbers. So there's 170 here. It's not the same as 170 here, but we can look at the Wolfspar one, for example, and you see here's an airgun array, typical in Gulf of Mexico. I think it's one of these 5,000 cubic inch airgun arrays again, and you see the Wolfspar here that there's significantly more energy in the lows. And of course, if the thing with vibrators, you can deploy more of them, and you can increase the dwell time and only sweep at certain frequencies. So it really allows us to tailor, if you want some sort of FWI source, anything that should operate from 2 to 5 hertz or whatever is needed. Now, I'm going to talk about source ghosts again, and I have a sort of a short little movie to play. A source going off. This is very synthetic. But you see the sort of the primary going here first, and then the source following in. This is energy, so it's not inverted. It's showing the energy. So the sea surface has a reflection coefficient of close to -1, but it varies with frequency, sea state, and incidence angle. And there's a nice paper here from Ukuvudi, 2013, which from PDS that sort of gives some more detail on this. But the ghost basically creates a double exposure where the second exposure is inverted. Oh, not that one. There we go. So in the time domain, this is an air gun pop just for comparison. This is the main pulse. And once I have this sort of the main pulse, I can copy it, delay it, and then I have the ghost response. In the frequency domain, I have my main pulse here in red again. And when but by taking this through the ghost response, it turns into sort of a ghost function here in the frequency domain. So I can multiply my frequency response with the ghost function and get the actual response, the blue staple here. And there's a nice little formula to compute this ghost response. Now, this ghost function, if I plot it, here I plot it for 5 meters, and you see it goes from some frequencies are zeroed out. This is where the notch is, and some frequencies are multiplied by up to 2. So there's a, yeah. But the deeper you tow it, you see it becomes steeper here. And if I really tow it deep, it becomes very, very, very steep here. So the deeper the tow, the more notches, but the deeper the tow, the more low frequency we kind of let through here as well. And now I'm going to talk about an important difference between air guns and vibrators. So as we said, a deeper tow, the ghost functions allow for more low frequency energy. But for air guns, it's such that the increased ambient pressure makes the air bubble collapse faster. And that pushes this towards higher frequency. So that means that 1 here, the deep tow ghost, and the 2 here, they kind of cancel out. So it turns out that we can't really increase the low frequency output by towing deep. It's very limited, at least with air guns. Now, with vibrators, it's different. We get the same benefit by towing deeper, but the increased ambient pressure does not significantly influence the vibrator output. So 1 and 2 does not cancel out. So we can increase the low frequency output by towing deeper for vibrators. So we can have some vibrators that tow shallow and some vibrators that tow deep. And typically, I'm going to give you an example here on the next slide. So here I have 2 vibrators. And first I have them at 5, the high frequency one at 5 and the low frequency one at 10 meters. But by pushing the low frequency vibrator down to 30 meters, you see here on the left how much extra energy I get out of the vibrator because of the ghost response. I get sort of up to 6 dB extra. And of course, if I go from 1 low frequency vibrator to three low frequency vibrators, I can get another 10 dB. And if you notice now, the number here is 210, and this is very, very comparable to what we get with big air gun arrays. So how to get more how to get more low frequency energy? Well, I can of course deploy more vibrators. I can increase the time they spend on the low frequencies. I can sweep at a narrow frequency band, and of course have them at the right depth. And well, I skipped this one. I'll talk about this. This is my only sort of negative slide, if you like, on vibrators. What's the problem with vibrators? So they're mechanical systems, and such systems, they will inevitably emit higher order harmonics of their fundamental output. So if you do a spectrogram of a size of a vibrator sweep, so this one is a 5-second sweep, goes from 20 to about 150 hertz. You will also see these harmonics of the signal. And this is from one vibrator. This is from another vibrator that's been published. You see the harmonics there. And this is from a third vibrator. This has been published. So these harmonics, they're down. They're about 20 dB down from the fundamental, but they're there. And they contain higher frequency noise. And then I have sort of a question to the audience here. You don't need to answer it, but could these harmonics be used for something useful, perhaps? That's a challenge to think about. And you can also notice, you see there's a line here, and you see there's a line here. You couldn't see a line in this one, but these are sort of engine noise or mechanical noise that's also emitted from the vibrators. So they're not perfect. There are some problems and some challenges with them. Right. Last 4 or 5 slides now. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the 4D challenges of a marine vibrator. So if you want to do a vibrator monitor on a vibrator baseline, it's basically just like an air gun monitor on an air gun baseline. You have to match source and receiver position, amplitude and phase, since it's a vibrator, not only the signal. But this is kind of, I guess it's done on land with land vibrators, and it should be doable. Shouldn't be any big problems. But if you go to vibrators, sort of a challenge in the future would be to do a VIB monitor on an air gun baseline, and then we also need to match the source position, and that comes with some challenges. And I'm going to give some ideas on how this could be done and what we're thinking about it. So first of all, we need to deconvolve the vibrator signal, and to deconvolve it, we need to know what was emitted. So with air gun arrays, we have near-field hydrophones to determine the notional source, and this is kind of well established. We do that all the time. Now, vibrators, they tend to be physically large, so they're not exact a monopole in the near field. But if we have a lot of sensors, we can measure, and compute the notional source. And we also need to sort of carefully account for noise and harmonics. So we need an accurate source control software to minimize such noise. But we think that could be done, a deconvolution here. But here's another problem. So during a 5-second sweep or a 10-second sweep, 5 seconds, the vessel will move typically 12.5 meters if we operate at our normal sort of 4.5, 5 knots talking speed, which we probably will. And then it becomes impossible to match both a high frequency and a low frequency in a sweep to an impulsive source position from an air gun. Now, we know that 4D sensitivity to source mispositioning, that increases with frequency. So below sort of 20 hertz, we can probably tolerate some mispositioning, maybe up to 10 or 20 meters. But above 50 hertz, we need positioning accuracy below 2 to 5 meters, which is typically what is required from 4Ds with air guns. So if this is my sort of okay, we look at this stack first. This is just sort of an example stack, but here in the shallow we have high frequency signal, and as we get deeper and deeper and deeper, the high frequencies are absorbed, and we only have sort of a dominant frequency. So if this was my reservoir here, so maybe my highest frequency of interest is 60 hertz or around 60 hertz, typically. And then what we probably want to do is we want to match the part of the sweep where 60 hertz is emitted, which could be around here, after 4 seconds in the sweep, to the air gun position. So we need to think very carefully on how we pop, how we sweep the air guns, and which frequency we match to the baseline. Another benefit with vibrators is that they're not limited by gun filling time or anything like that, so we can continuously sweep them. So that means that it's probably possible to sweep all the time and have a much denser shot point interval or sweep point interval, if you like, or sample the complete wave field much more thoroughly than we can with air guns. So that's sort of a plus on the vibrator side. And here comes the deblending in as well. So if you have multiple sources, they need to be fully deblended if you do this, but that should be possible because we have this phase encoding, which is probably superior to the degree. And then again, I'm just repeating the slide that vibrators are highly repeatable and much more repeatable than air guns. So to sum up, VIB on VIB 40, potentially better than air guns. It hasn't been done yet, but we don't think this is going to be a problem. VIB on air gun 40, that remains challenging, and but perhaps it can be done, and that's probably what we're going to work on for the next few years here. So stay tuned. That's the last slide.
Yeah, we would of course like to thank lots of different people for contributing and giving us lots of material. We would probably spend the next 15 minutes naming them all. So we're going to do that just in one sweep. So everybody listening here who has given us material, thank you very much. You helped us a lot in collecting that massive amount of information and condensing it into one webinar. We are really, really appreciating your contributions, and some of the images that are used in this presentation were taken from company websites who did not respond to requests. So we just took what was publicly available from their websites, and as well as SEG and EAGE or patent publications. So thanks everyone, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Suzanne and Thomas, for a very interesting webinar. Seems I still have issues with the microphone or something like that, but that's not an issue. But we can open now for Q&A session, and perhaps we can start with. I saw someone raised up a hand in a second. First question to. Yeah, if anyone has a question in the audience to Thomas and Suzanne. Great, again, thanks for a very interesting webinar going through the history of marine sources, but also finalizing with very new new application or recent application, let's say, marine vibrator solutions. We have several questions in the Q&A box, and perhaps we can start from the point to the list. How to get list of references. I guess this will be this is a recorded webinar, so information that is available in the slides can be seen there. But if you have any questions, you can directly contact Suzanne and Thomas, of course. How to avoid delay between guns in hypercluster, which is generally a common problem.
Sorry, say again, please.
I didn't get that either.
How to avoid?
We can't see written. We can't see
you
any
can
written
see
questions.
Yep,
I think.
You can see in the Q&A box. So how to avoid delay between guns in hypercluster, which is generally a common problem.
How to avoid delays.
Yeah, I guess.
You want me to give it a shot? I can. How to avoid delays between guns in hypercluster, which is generally a common problem.
I have not operated the only hypercluster that is called a hypercluster, the VSB source. I assume you basically test your guns like you would do in a bubble test, and then from the bubble test, you know the individual gun's response of how it fires, and then you probably want to align the peaks going downwards. So I think the structure itself is just 1.5 meters between the two. So the ones that are higher up, you would probably want to have firing a little bit earlier than the deeper module in order for the peaks to align. But you tune it with the gun. Most gun controllers have tuning abilities built in. So I would expect that to work pretty straightforward.
I think there's like a 1 millisecond uncertainty on these gun controllers as well. So I can imagine it can be a problem. But
you see it in the records, in the far field records. If you do your bubble test, you should see it and then you adjust until you get there. I think it's less than 1/10 of a millisecond is the increments in most gun controllers for delays. So it's very, very fine. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, The next question, it looks like a two-part question at least. When we use azimuthally variant airgun arrays as a seismic source, should we use azimuthally variant source signature for seismic modeling and for full waveform inversion? If yes, would the azimuthly variant source signature be one of the standard deliverables from the Marine Acquisition Company?
Ooh. Well, typically you get the source models delivered as a deliverable, and that includes the azimuthal and in-array directivities. So you know the directivities from the source models that are provided up front, but whether your array actually responded like it, because it obviously depends. In the water, your arrays might move a little bit, and with every movement, the directivity will ever so slightly change. So this is a tough one. I'm not entirely sure that is actually straightforward and easy to deliver out of the box today. I don't think for us it's a standard deliverable. You may be able to invert it from the near fields and the passive near fields, that you get some
that's maybe
response,
the
but
most promising approach, but it requires a lot of processing to use the near field hydrophones.
Yeah. I hope that
Okay,
answered your question.
Thank you. We have a question from anonymous user. Do I observe a slight loss of low frequencies with the E sources? I think.
I don't think that's the case.
In theory, not.
In theory, not. No. Let's see. Where are we? Yeah, I can see here in that Gandalf model, one of them moved slightly, but I'm not sure how real that is, because the original volume is still the same. It's just released a little bit slower. So I don't think it has been noted on the publications that were made where the two sources or standard source and a version of eSource was flip-flopped and then compared in a stack. I don't think so. So if there is a small shift, it is definitely minor, I think.
All right, thank you. Can you elaborate on the source wavelet shape for sparkers?
Oh, they are like pulses, I think. They are like pulses, and they don't have oscillating bubble to go with it, and that's the important difference. So it's more pulse-like. I cannot judge from my own experience of, how repeatable they are from one shot to the next. I assume there is definitely also some element of variance in it from shot to shot, just given the nature that they are towed comparatively shallow, and with that probably very much subject to movement, wave heights. So the important part is basically they don't have all those bubble oscillations to go with them, I think.
Thank you.
And they are sharpish pulse.
Yep. With full waveform inversion in mind, can you comment on which source technology you think will provide the most value to future full waveform inversion workflows?
So Wattic, you want to know where to put your money, right? No, I mean, we try to lay out the positive and the negative sides. I mean, the bigger the gun, the larger the gun, the fueling time, and then of course environmental constraint might come in as well. So I don't think there's a one single answer to this. This is sort of, you have to look at your needs for your particular survey. What kind of offsets are you looking at? How many nodes are you shooting into? I mean, all these things. And then try to find what's best suited in this case.
Yeah, you might be limited by operational constraints of what you are allowed to do, what the biggest volume you can show up with.
Yeah. What can I put on my vessel before I have to get a new vessel out there, which is certainly a lot of extra cost, and you want to avoid that. Yeah, many constraints.
Yeah, and always remember, by just doubling up of the one source you choose, you can always make up for something. It doubles. If you have 2 of them, you get an extra 6 dB. If you have 3 of them, you get an extra 9 dB. So there is no clear answer of I would put my money in this one. It depends of where you are and what you want to do.
Thank you. What is the most mature seismic source for oil and gas players performing 4D acquisition, and what is the most promising source in the near future?
Well, maturity is airgun by far.
Yeah.
Airguns is 99% of everything that's been done in the last 50 years.
Yeah. To the extent that even, if a source in a baseline was of a certain type that you would today maybe not do anymore, you are forced in a 4D to repeat the crimes of the baseline in order to match it in some scenarios. So it's definitely by far the airgun. Yeah.
And then the second part of the question: what source technology is most promising? Oh, then again, where to put my money? I don't know. I think all idea was to just show you what's out there, and there's even more because there's stuff that we didn't mention as well. But yeah.
We're not giving investment advice, but I don't think the air guns are going to go away anytime soon. And once the marine VIPs kick off, they will definitely be considered.
They could take a small part of the market, but I think air guns are going to be used for 20, 30 years more, for sure.
Can you give an example of the integration between, or can you discuss the integration between the air guns and VIPs? Is there something you consider, at least as a transition period?
Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think we will. I don't think we'll do a survey with both of them at the same time. But I might be wrong.
Yeah, well, one could think of use cases of having very low sweeps, because you can do the very long one and then the high frequencies you need to make up with air guns. So you could think of hybrids that solve particular challenges. But is that easier to operate? It's probably easier to not mix air hoses with marine VIP umbilicals. You probably are more likely to do just air gun or just VIP sources. Yeah, but one could envisage to do a mix and match on the different frequencies.
Yeah, but probably not on the same vessel. I think that's going to you need a lot of hardware on one vessel.
All right. So Paul says, thanks for a good presentation. You mentioned downtime due to mammals could be lower for vibrators compared to air guns. Could you comment on technical reliability and downtime of vibrators compared to air guns?
That's more for you, Thomas.
I knew that one would be coming.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the vibrators that are being designed by the industry right now, the sort of design goal is to have something that is comparable in reliability to air guns. But of course, it's still early days, and in the first surveys, there's going to be more downtime on vibrators than there are on air guns that are mature and has been around for 50 years. So yes, there will be more downtime, technical downtime on vibrators initially, but then hopefully over as we get more experience and in a few years down the road, they will be comparable. I think that's the goal at least.
I mean, air guns also had an evolution. At the beginning, they were surely not as reliable as they are today.
Yeah.
So it's always an evolution. You learn. You first need to walk before you can run, and you learn how to.
And there's with air gun arrays. I mean, you might have 30 air guns in an array, and you have these dropout tables. So you're allowed for a couple of them to stop working, and you have even live replacements, and that's a great benefit. It's not so easy with vibrators. You might have sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 vibrators in the water, and you can't have hot spares in the water in the same way. That's going to be very challenging. So yeah, air guns have some benefits.
All right, thank you. We have a comment followed by a question. In a world driven at times more by perception than by facts, how do we know that the marine vibrator will be more acceptable to the environment than the conventional air gun? It was mentioned PAM and MMO might not be required for marine vibrator. Do you know if this might or will be the case across the world?
No, I don't know. And it was my my belief that it would be easier to get freedom to operate with vibrators in legislations where air guns might be problematic or outright banned today. But I mean, the different legislations, different laws, different pressure groups, we don't know.
All right. Yep.
Yeah, but without a commercial, choosing for marine VIPs, the legislators won't have completely mapped out, what they want yet. So once that technology is on the market, available on a larger scale, then they will act and basically put legislation in place. But until then, we don't quite know which way they're going to go with it. But it is very conceivable, spreading out the energy and lowering your sound pressure levels and sound exposure levels by, what was it, 40 dB you showed?
Yeah.
Then it's very conceivable that that will have an influence on the legislation.
I can elaborate a bit more. I mean, in some countries in Europe, and I think in sort of part of the US as well, air guns has more or less been banned. You're not allowed to shoot with air guns at all. And that's easy to do if there's no oil and gas in the ground. That doesn't cost very much. But there still might be a need to do seismic surveys if you want to do CO2 storage there or windmill foundations and so on. And that is also an interesting market for air guns for marine vibrators, because they have to.
All right, thank you. The next question from an anonymous user. Is it possible to integrate data from an air gun on shallow water with data from a vibrator in deep waters within the same geographical area? What is a potential source? What are the potential sources of errors we can get, and how do we remedy it? Oh, it's a long question.
Yeah, I think this remains to be seen. This is a question for processing once we have some experience, because we don't. Now it would be just speculation on my part.
Okay, next question from another anonymous user. I'm not sure if it's the same anonymous user, but anyway. It seems to me that the continuous shooting has many benefits, environmentally as well as the source location can be determined in processing 4D. So why isn't it used more?
This is a hard one, because usually when you go out and do a survey, unless it's for yourself in the multi-client realm, you get given the source specs. It's not up to you or the operators to decide on how to shoot a certain survey. You get given your marching orders, so to speak. So if we have any of the oil companies or multi-client company representatives online, I would be interested to hear from them to chip in on that one. What's the scare?
I guess one question could be that one idea that, as you just earlier mentioned, is for these you are locked in history, right? And then also it's the conventionality. We do choose at some moments. We do choose at sometimes the different Darwin configurations. We do test those ones, right? So that's a very interesting question as well. Why don't we try it on the source side that much? But we do try as well.
Yeah, I guess it may depend, on the strength of your 4D response. If your 4D signal to noise is expected to be low, you're not going to take any risks and you stick with what you had before. And the more repeatable it is, the more likely you get the value of information out of that expense of shooting a 4D. If your response is strong, you probably can be a little bit more forward-leaning, and I showed in the Hexasource example where Francesca published the dual source to the Hexasource examples, and I mean those examples were fantastic. But I'm sure that there are 4Ds where it would not look the same.
But I think that was a step on the way because we are risk averse as the industry. Of course we are, because it's big cost in shooting a 4D. But yeah, the Hexasource is getting us there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. One part of it is, of course, 4Ds. The other part is 3Ds or structural definitions, because in complex areas, we do sometimes look at the different configurations of the service so that we can benefit from the characteristics and eliminate subsurface better. So, for example, if the source is emitting more low frequencies or more stable low frequencies, then that can help a certain data analysis, data characteristics, interpretation analysis. So it's an interesting question. So it's not only 4Ds. 4Ds are a bit of holy grail of repeatability, both on the acquisition side, but also on the processing side. But other parts of the data analysis, it's an interesting concept.
All right, well, we are almost out of time. And since this is the first webinar using this platform, I'm not sure if it's going to just cut us off. So I think we have time for one. I think we have time for at least one question. So we're going to go into it, and then maybe Eamon can wrap things up. So the question is, can you comment on potential for operation of any of the emerging source types, including BOS, on semi-autonomous vehicles? How maintenance friendly are marine vibrators versus air guns, which we already addressed? So maybe just talk about any of the sources related to semi-autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, that's that. I'll reflect a little bit upon that. So when we shoot a 4D, I'm going back to 4D again, you have sort of an exclusion zone that you're not allowed to be closer than 500 meters or so from the platform. So I think there will be serious opposition from the oil platform operators if there was autonomous vessels going around there with the big sources and
that weigh tons,
and lots of fuel. So to do sort of exploration in the open sea, yeah, I'm sure you can do autonomous sources. That should be possible. But I mean, 50% of at least of our market is 4Ds today. So I think we don't trust the autonomy enough to do it this way yet. But it's really exciting, and we've been discussing this internally for many years, sort of concepts and so on. But I think politically, we're not allowed to do that for safety reasons yet.
All right, thank you.
You have in some of the high resolution and ultra high resolution markets where you have the boomers and sparkers, which are obviously much smaller
yeah.
and a much scary beast. Those ones are on remotely operated vehicles out there. They are used in that mode.
But the air gun arrays and the vibrator arrays, I think they're just too big.
All right, thank you. How do you account for the marine vibe being towed in water as opposed to land vibe sweeping in one location at a time?
Yeah, you have to do what we call source motion correction, which is done in processing. And I know there's a geophysical prospecting paper coming out in a month or two on that topic. There's been a couple of EAG presentations on it as well. So it's it's a processing step.
Right, thank you. With the marine vibrators having lower overall amplitude levels, are you concerned about falling below the ambient energy levels in certain areas?
Yes, very good point. So then we need more units.
Or longer sweeps.
Or longer sweeps. Yeah, no, we are very aware of that, and we are we can get short on energy if there are deep targets, pre-salt, sub-salt, when you need some punch in your source. This is going to be a challenge.
All right, thank you. That looks like all of the questions in the Q&A box. If anyone has a question that they would like to ask directly, you can just maybe raise your hand and I can try to unmute you. You can ask.
People might be exhausted after 2 hours now, Laurie.
It could be.
Sympathize that this was long.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Eamon to do a.
Yeah, thank you. Great work, great webinar. Thank you, Susanna and Thomas, and thank you, Laurie, for taking the Q&A session. And I'd like to again say thanks for the presenters and also SEG for organizing this webinar. Please join us for next webinars in the future, and you can find us on the LinkedIn page, SEG Europe Regional Advisory Committee, and also SEG events. Thank you again, and this webinar is, I see some questions that it's going to be recorded. It is recorded and it will be available on as a recording on YouTube, so you can watch it later as well. With this, I'd like to say thanks and see you again.
Yeah. Thanks a lot,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.